This Sunday is Remembrance Day. I remember growing up in the 1970s and 80s, and Remembrance Day to me as a child was about old people. We were lucky then. Canada hadn't been at war since Korea. Movies and pictures about those wars were in black and white. It seemed so antiquated, but not now. 158 Canadians have died in war in Afghanistan. Most of them are younger than I am. And for every soldier killed, there are many more who are injured, including grave injuries like losing limbs. Remembrance Day isn't just about history now, it's about today. We're doing our best to honor Remembrance Day here at the Sun News Network. It's a conscious part of our editorial identity. We support the troops. Most of that is just moral support. We're just a media company, but moral support is important to press the real decision makers in government to continue to give soldiers and veterans what they need. And of course, moral support is important directly. It's the least our soldiers deserve, given what they've risked and often sacrificed for the rest of us. Part of our show today is about remembering and honoring our soldiers and their families. We'll tell you more about that in a moment. But first, I want to show you something that should be as natural as supporting the troops is, in fact, not natural for some unpatriotic elements in our society. And I refer, unfortunately, to Canada's government broadcaster, the CBC. Yesterday, the CBC got its hands on a video produced by some of our soldiers at a dinner at a military base in Nova Scotia a few years ago. It was a short 4-minute spoof, making fun of Osama bin Laden's older brother, Eugene. Here's the thing, though. The CBC ran the video yesterday, but they actually got it weeks ago by their own admission.
And they also ordered that all the video be destroyed. Well, one copy wasn't, and it was leaked to the CBC just a few weeks ago.
So they sat on this video for weeks, and they just released it as a big, breathless exclusive yesterday. Now, it's obvious why. Had they reported on it when they got it weeks ago, it probably would have got less notice during the final weeks of the U.S. presidential election. And if they had waited a little bit longer, it would have been after Remembrance Day. So the CBC chose to release it now, just days before Remembrance Day. It's their special gift to soldiers and veterans. The timing of it is their way of showing what they think ought to be their chief story about our soldiers, that they're a bunch of racist pigs. The CBC says the video is an exclusive, but it actually isn't, because the CBC called the military police to come to watch the video at the CBC offices. Seriously, the CBC isn't just reporting on this scandal. They're pitching it to the police with the obvious implication that the police should go in and lay some sort of charges here. That is, the CBC isn't even pretending to be reporters. They're activists, anti-military activists, lobbying the police to attack our soldiers. Now, we've seen this before. A few years ago, night after night, the CBC repeated without a shred of evidence the slander that our Canadian troops had committed war crimes in Afghanistan, and the government was covering it up. Here's just a sampling.
They are bombshell allegations of torture. The government rejected calls for a public inquiry into the alleged torture of Afghan prisoners.
The Canadians intended some prisoners to be tortured so as to gather intelligence. If true, that would be a war crime.
If these documents were released, what they will show is that Canada partnered deliberately with the torturers in Afghanistan for the interrogation of detainees.
Is there any evidence that detainees turned over by Canadians to Afghan authorities were actually tortured?
It's a pack of lies. It was all lies. You might remember that one guy in the orange-colored shirt. He's the university professor and regular CBC go-to guy, Amir Attaran. Now, we've talked about him before. The CBC must have repeated Attaran's baseless accusation 1,000 times over the year that followed. Of course, they didn't mention that Attaran was a financial donor to the Liberal Party. Now, in the end, the Canadian government appointed an independent inquiry staffed by 3 senior judges that reviewed literally tens of thousands of classified military and diplomatic documents. Opposition MPs were on that committee too, including Stéphane Dion. And they didn't find a single email, a single memo, a single shred of evidence behind this slur of war crimes. But the CBC slandered our troops as bigoted, racist war criminals for years. And of course, the CBC never apologized. Well, now they're back at it, and boy, they've got their smoking gun. Here's a clip of the CBC video that they ran last night. This is the offensive video. Look at this.
So tell me, how is it that you came to live in our country?
This was very simple.
You infidels are not too bright. I have one very good friend, Binder Dundat, who works in the customs of the Vancouver airport.
So you're living in Vancouver. What do you do for a living out there?
What do you think I am doing here, you silly infidel? I am driving one very nice taxi. Hey, kid, get away from that car bomb. I mean, taxi. It is very dangerous. Don't be giving me your dirty finger, I'm telling you. I come to your home and I'll hump your goat. Now go away.
So that's the worst of it. A soldier pretending to be Osama bin Laden's older brother saying some goofy things on TV. Now, I've some artistic differences with this skit. I mean, Osama bin Laden is Muslim, not Sikh. That guy was clearly using a Sikh accent, and Binder is a Sikh name, and his turban looks Sikh, and talking about driving cabs in Vancouver, well, that's just the wrong group of people. If you know your Sikh history, you'll know Sikhs were actually persecuted by Muslims, and the Sikh military tradition grew specifically to defend Sikhs against Muslim bullies. So wrong accent and wrong guy. But that's just a snobby criticism. And maybe the jokes weren't particularly funny. But that's not what the CBC was concerned with. They think it's horrendous that one of our soldiers, who put himself at risk of harm fighting against Muslim fundamentalists in Afghanistan, might actually try to make fun of Osama bin Laden and some of the things Al-Qaeda and the Taliban do, like car bombs. This was horrific to the CBC. Listen to how they described it yesterday.
A video bombshell for Canada's military, a CBC News exclusive on why this soldier's humor is being viewed as offensive.
It's racially charged. Why was it made? What's the government saying about it? Obviously, it's racially charged.
The Canadian military has launched an investigation into a racially charged video created by members of the Canadian Forces.
I don't need to really give you any of the details of the video, except that the language is offensive.
Canada's military is investigating an offensive video.
Behavior that's not really becoming of a member of the military.
Note that the CBC calls this reporting. No. Reporting is telling the facts, but saying again and again and again that this was offensive and racially charged is offering an opinion. But again, this is the CBC's Remembrance Day special. They saved it right for this moment. And the host had the audacity to crap on our soldiers while wearing a poppy. Yeah, classy. Now, what exactly was the problem here? That some guy wore a beard and painted his face brown to pretend to be Osama bin Laden? Isn't that what you do when you're pretending to be bin Laden? I mean, I bet our soldiers put on a fake little mustache and spoke in a German accent when they were doing anti-Hitler skits in the 1940s too. Maybe the CBC would have think that's racist also. But hang on a second here. Hang on. The CBC, don't they sometimes do skits quite similar to this one, making fun of people, even occasionally Osama bin Laden? Why, yes. Yes, they do. Here's one of them. Take a look.
2. Wash your hands often. Soap and water is best, but rebels can't be choosers.
So there's the CBC making fun of Osama bin Laden. They put on a fake beard and turban. Now, they didn't paint their comedian's face brown because they didn't have to. They chose a brown-skinned comedian named Sean Majumder on purpose. It just wouldn't be convincing if they had chose a blonde or if they had chose a woman. They chose a brown man to play a brown man. Now, here's Majumder, again, mocking Hamid Karzai, the brown president of Afghanistan.
Do you know what the instructions are for this tent?
Stand painting Jesus had made. That's not a tent. It's a vacuum cleaner.
Oh, vacuum cleaner. Oh, like this.
It's hard to find examples of the CBC mocking Muslims, but occasionally they do it. And once in a while, they're even a little bit funny, though, let's be honest, that Karzai thing without a laugh track would have been pretty weak. Now, here's more traditional CBC humor, mocking our soldiers as stupid and boorish, but presenting an Afghan as a noble moderate.
Okay, thanks for your time and good luck with this mission.
What is the...
how?
What do you mean how? What do you...
Me so sorry.
Okay, you know what?
It's everything I read, man.
I'm gonna kick your...
Yeah, that's more like it. Our soldiers, in the eyes of the CBC, are rude and stupid. Now, that kind of offensive humor, racially charged humor, the CBC will do all day long, won't they? Now, that white guy there was Mark Critch, a comedian at the CBC. Speaking of offensive and mocking religions, it's sort of Critch's specialty, but only against the one religion that he personally hates, the Catholic Church. Look at this beauty from Critch.
Bishop Lahey was found with child pornography just a month after he oversaw a $15 million settlement for victims of sexual abuse. I fear I must punish the bishop with the church's strongest punishment. I must move him to another diocese and make him an archbishop.
Yeah, not really funny. Just Mark Critch finally getting even with the fact that he was forced to go to church every Sunday with his mom. Whatever, free country. I mean, hate who you like. Except the CBC doesn't think it should be allowable to denounce a religion or even mock it gently if that religion is Islam. They'll even call in the police. Seriously, that's what they did. But how did the CBC square the fact that it has a brown guy, a token really, dressing up as bin Laden to do the odd joke, with the fact that they find our own soldiers doing it, blowing off steam in a homemade video, so offensive? Well, they went to Sean Majumdar himself to ask him. Here's a couple of clips of that.
You cannot compare what that was to anything like 22 Minutes. They are military personnel that are not paid professionals as stand-ups or as comedians. Anybody who makes those kind of off-color comments in any workplace around Canada would be severely reprimanded. Our show is a show that has a team of people working on creating sketches. You know, we vet it, we go through, we're trying to be as culturally sensitive as we possibly can. There's no comparison to what they did to what we do here at 22 Minutes.
Did you get that? Jokes are okay, just not in the workplace, really? So at a comedy night at the mess hall, Sean Majumdar thinks jokes aren't allowed at a comedy night in the mess hall. Or is it that they're not paid professionals? So you have to be a professional comedian like Majumdar in order to make jokes like that? Is there some professional standard like doctors have to be a professional comedian? Is there a government joke inspector who says which of us are allowed to make jokes about Osama bin Laden and which of us aren't? Oh, and he's got a team of people with him, so that means the jokes that he does are funny. But my favorite was Majumdar saying that all of the CBC's jokes are culturally sensitive. Now, we know that's not true. We just saw how they mock Christians and the Pope, for example, and once in a while, rarely, they mock bin Laden too. So he's not telling the truth about being sensitive. He's lying or spinning or whatever you want to call it. But it would actually be worse if Majumdar were telling the truth. Could you imagine if a comedian only told jokes that were culturally sensitive? Could you imagine if that was the new rule for jokes? Or is there a special Muslim exemption? Here's Majumdar again.
Muslims have faced so much backlash here in Canada and in the United States over a small group of people in these countries who are fundamentalists, and for us to poke fun at those people is wrong outright.
So there's been a massive Muslim backlash in North America, Majumdar says. Again, not true. It's just not true statistically, and certainly not true in a country where the fastest growing religion is Islam. But again, listen to Majumdar. He says that this skit mocking bin Laden is, quote, wrong outright. So no jokes are allowed about it, he says. What a confused fool. I mean, forget his own hypocrisy or the CBC's serial slander of others. Forget that Majumdar just isn't that coherent or smart. That's not his job. His job isn't to be smart, it's to be funny. But he says it's wrong to try to be funny about Osama bin Laden because Muslims have had it hard or whatever it is. Even for the men who just got back from Afghanistan and risked their lives fighting bin Laden's followers, Majumdar says it's insensitive to make fun of bin Laden? This is what the CBC thinks is the most pressing story about our troops and veterans in 2012 on the eve of Remembrance Day, digging up a 2010 video skit, spinning it into a national scandal, and calling in the police to show the men. Our soldiers risked their lives in Afghanistan fighting for our security and our freedom, including our freedom of speech. And the ingrates of the CBC who failed to brand our soldiers as war criminals now try to brand them as hate criminals and to destroy the very freedom of speech for which our troops are fighting. The CBC is a disgrace. Sean Majumdar is an unfunny hypocrite. We here at The Sun stand by our troops for their bravery and sacrifice. And on this Remembrance Day weekend, we stand by their freedom of speech. We don't try to have them arrested for telling jokes about terrorists. Disgusting.